A very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to Insarkari, and in this video, we'll be analyzing all the important articles from the perspective of UPSC Civil Services examination, and this is going to be for 28th of March 2023. But before starting, kindly excuse me for bad throat. And the important topics that we'll be looking into includes the NCERT textbooks. They are set for a revamp. Next, we see that one Namibian cheetah, which was translocated to India's Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh, it dies of kidney ailment. And we are seeing that COVID-19 cases are on rise. So what is going to be the plan ahead for such a situation? And let's start with the analysis then. The Supreme Court issues notice to Gujarat and Center in the Bilkis Bano case. So since she had basically petitioned against the release of the convicts, so Supreme Court has issued notice to Gujarat and Center. So let's have a look what kind of notice has been issued by Supreme Court. So it indicated it will primarily focus on the question of Gujarat's jurisdiction to prematurely release 11 men who were sentenced to life for the gang rape of Bilkis Bano and the murder of her family members during 2002 riots. So one focus point is going to be the Gujarat's jurisdiction over taking this decision to prematurely release these 11 convicts. And a bench of judges, K.M. Joseph and B.V. Nagaratna, wondered whether the state followed the uniform standards while granting early remission to the 11 men when murdered convicts tend to otherwise languish in prison for years. So they are going to look into whether a uniform standard was followed or not. And the court was hearing the writ petition separately, which was filed by Ms. Banu and others, including CPIM leaders. So that's there. So and it was also like referred to section 432(7) clause B, which said that the appropriate government would be the state within which the offender is sentenced. So Supreme Court is mainly going to look into two things, that is focusing upon the question of Gujarat's jurisdiction and whether an uniform standard was followed or not. So there are two schemes basically. One is the Sukanya Samriddhi and then we have the PPF. So its interest rate hike is basically unlikely as of now. So investors in the popular small savings schemes of Public Provident Fund and the Sukanya Samriddhi account, whose rates have not been hiked since January 2019, they are unlikely to get a higher returns anytime soon. So अभी recently as of now हम expect नहीं कर रहे कि in small saving schemes में जो आपको return मिलता है in the form of interest which you get, वो अभी increase नहीं किया जाएगा. So this is because the government is no longer in the complete agreement with the Shamala Gopinath Committee formula, which was adopted in April 2016 to reset the small savings interest rates every quarter in line. So there is basically disagreement over this Shamala Gopinath Committee formula that was adopted. So you can find out about what kind of formula it is, how, like, what variables is it using to calculate the interest rates. And finally, Supreme Court gives note for the UP Civic polls with OBC quota. So Supreme Court, it gave the go-ahead to conduct the civic body elections in UP with seats reserved for the backward classes. And this ruling, it came after the state local bodies dedicated backward classes commission completed its detailed survey to identify the backward classes that deserve political representation in the local bodies. So it was upheld by the Supreme Court, and it has been allowed to conduct the civic body elections. So earlier, basically, the High Court of Allahabad, it had ruled to hold the elections without reserving the seats for the backward classes, but this has been overturned by the Supreme Court. So protest by the Banjara community turns violent in Karnataka. So protesters, they try to break into the residence of ex-CM B.S. Yediyurappa, who represents the constituency in assembly, and they raise slogans against the BJP government is CM Baswaraj Pumai. So the tension, it prevailed at Shikaripur in Shivmoga district on Monday as protest opposing the internal reservation among the scheduled caste turned violent. So there's protest going on against the internal reservation among the scheduled caste. So right now, the people of Banjara community, they fall under the category of scheduled caste touchable category that had gathered to take a protest march from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Circle to Taluk office in the town, and they were arguing that internal reservation divides these scheduled castes. So they are, in a way, they are protesting against this thing. And talking about their status at pan-India level, so they are having different like reservations in different categories. In some states, they fall on the category of scheduled tribes. In some states, they're under the OBC category. In some, they are under the SC category. So there is not, a uniform standard of categorizing or providing them reservation under a single category. So talking about the G20 meetings, so Prime Minister says that India's G20 agenda will be inclusive, ambitious, action-oriented, and decisive. So let us work together to shape a new paradigm of human-centric globalization. And the next G20 meeting, it is going to be held in Uttarakhand, which is also known as Dev Bhumi. So there's going to be anti-corruption working group meeting. There's going to be Chief Science Advisors Roundtable, and thirdly, there would be Infrastructure Working Group. Coming to the editorial section, so we've been seeing that there have been political shiftings in Nepal. So since Nepal is Nepal is India's neighbor, so we need to just have a awareness regarding what changes are going on in Nepal. So, in a short span of time since being in power from December 25th, 2022, Nepal's Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal, who is also famously known as Prachanda, supremo of the Maoist center, he has had to face a vote of confidence twice on 10th of January 2023 and again on 20th of March. So he came to power on 25th December 2022, and uske baad he had to face the no confidence motion twice since then. So though it would seem very unusual, it is not an unexpected happening given the state of disarray contemporary Nepali politics it is in after the general elections in November 2022. And इससे पहले भी जो 3 general elections हुए थे उसमें भी there was a hung parliament, there was no clear majority. So the order is not important कि जो भी इससे पहले 3 general elections हुए थे इनमें who came to power. But right now also situation इतनी ज़्यादा we cannot say is very confident as far as the politics of Nepal is concerned. So Prachanda-led 10-party ruling coalition is in the making, but its survival and longevity they are the key issues. क्योंकि अगर हम coalition government की बात करते हैं यहाँ पे we are talking about कि 10 parties would be forming the coalition. So अगर उनमें से कोई एक भी आगे जाके they are not on the same page with the others. So again, it raises questions over the longevity and survival of such a type of coalition government. And apart from that, we have been seeing in Nepal there has been this problem of short-lived governments. So no government formed since the dawn of democracy in Nepal in 1951 has survived its full term. So Nepal, it was declared a democracy in 1951 and 1951 के बाद से अभी तक ऐसा एक बार भी नहीं हुआ है कि किसी गवर्नमेंट ने अपनी full term complete की हो. So it is very clearly evident कि there is this problem of short-lived government जो longevity जो challenge है that is obviously still there. So, for the sake of a stable government, the architect of the new constitution in 2015 worked on making a no confidence motion a complex and complicated process. So, जब Nepal में it got its new constitution in 2015, so जो no confidence motion का process था उसको थोड़ा और complex and complicated बना दिया गया ताकि उसको basically introduce करना इतना ज़्यादा easy ना हो. And जो government का survival है that is also not basically threatened. So it could not be entertained in the first 2 years of the government formation. उसको entertain नहीं किया गया for the first 2 years. And to do justice to this provision, it is sensible to amend the constitution to ensure that the prime minister of a coalition government should be from the party with the largest number of seats among the alliance partners in the parliament. So these are some of the developments as far as Nepal's politics is concerned. So we're seeing that next hotspot as far as, the global order is concerned. Right now it is Russia and Ukraine. Apart from that, we also having like tensions between Taiwan, between China and USA. So Taiwan is right now it is facing the pressure as China's relations with the US, it deteriorates. So by formally establishing diplomatic relations with China in 2023, Honduras, it has joined a growing list of countries that have recently switched recognition from TP to Beijing. So अभी 26 मार्च को ही हॉन्डुरस ने ज्वाइन की है basically Beijing को support करना, so they have come closer to China instead of Taiwan. So Taiwan, it now has only 12 countries besides Vatican with which it has diplomatic ties. So ताइवान के पास इतना सपोर्ट नहीं बचा है, या हम ये बोल सकते हैं कि with time the number of countries which have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, they are moving back. So Honduras, basically बहुत सारी ऐसी countries है which are trying to establish diplomatic relations with China instead of Taiwan. So because of the shrinking international space by Taiwan, it is pointing towards the growing stress on the current status quo across the Taiwan Strait. And the status quo has generally served both the sides across the strait well, preserving the peace against tall odds. So in Taiwan, a thriving democracy with a highly developed economy, that status quo remains the popular choice for most people, according to numerous public opinion surveys. And apart from that, However, both Beijing and Taipei, they have been accusing the other of changing the status quo. And in Taipei's view, Beijing has exerted growing diplomatic pressure to isolate Taiwan, as well as stepped up the military muscle flexing, as seen in the exercises that surrounded the island last year, following the visit of then US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So, this is what Taiwan believes. Ki China, it is in a way, it is going to exert more diplomatic pressure over Taiwan, and साथ ही साथ जो military drills की जा रही है by China, that is also in a way it is threatening the position of Taiwan. The tussle between the world's two biggest powers, here we're talking about China and US, it has left 23 million people of a vibrant and prosperous island caught in the middle. So that is the thing regarding Taiwan and the challenges that they are facing. So if we talk about India's helicopter program, we've seen recently that there were two accidents in a short span of time as far as the advanced light helicopter is concerned. So the flaws and whatever problems are being witnessed, that needs to be fixed quickly. So the checkered history of India's indigenous advanced light helicopter, which is also known as Dhruv, it touched a low when one of them were made a part of the Navy's newly acquired fleet, and it was on 8th of March 2023. So the maritime role helicopter, which was on a routine flight, reportedly it also experienced a sudden loss of power and rapid loss of height close to the coast of Mumbai in the forenoon. So basically, we are seeing some of the challenges in the working of these helicopters. Obviously, it is important to fix all these problems and the challenges that we are facing. So, if these are not fixed in time, possible flaws in design, production, quality control, that could obviously lead to the danger of repetition of such instances in future. So, it makes eminent sense for all the stakeholders to work on a war footing to address the design and production failures that are being witnessed, and there is much more at stake than reputation, such as the safety and the longevity of all the subsequent derivatives, which includes the light utility helicopters, the light combat helicopters, the Indian multi-role helicopters, for instance. So obviously, agar ऐसे किसी और helicopters में we are seeing problems, so it raises questions regarding the quality and the production of the other helicopters also, because we are making them indigenously, we are manufacturing them domestically. So that's why again it's a concern, because even in future we have to export them, so they are not going to be so smooth as we expected. So more than 300 of these machines from they form the backbone of the vertical lift service in Indian military. And the customers now, they have nowhere else to go, so there has to be a quick action regarding them. So Rohingya refugees, we need to know that they're moving from the Rakhine state of Myanmar, and now we are seeing that they are arriving on a beach in Indonesia. More than 500 Rohingya refugees, they landed in Indonesia's Aceh in 2022. And most recently, we see that 71 of them landed at a beach in the Aceh Besar district. So this is there in Indonesia. So again, coming to the hot topic of debate regarding disqualification, and it's been in news from a lot of days, and we have discussed the important details. So you can just go through the previous videos. We've also gone through the important constitutional articles. We've gone through the legislations which are there, their provisions. We've gone through the important Supreme Court judgments. So we have covered everything in detail, so you can just have a look if you haven't at the previous video. So we'll be not like repeating the things here again. So talking about the autism disease. So the autism spectrum disorder, it is a complex developmental condition that affects your social communication, interactions, and behavior. And in India, it remains widely misunderstood and underdiagnosed. So the signs of it can vary, but difficulty with social interactions, communication challenges, repetitive behaviors, and restricted interests, they are common symptoms of the autism disease, and it is important to consult a qualified healthcare professionals experienced in diagnosing and treating that in India. So there are different levels of ASD, and there again we are having different tools for the screening for this disease. So one common screening tool is the modified checklist for autism in toddlers, which is also called MCHAT revised. And this is a 20-question test for children who are aged between 16 to 30 months. And as per recent evidence, we are seeing that this method is not so effective in identifying autism in female children and who those from the minority, urban, and low income backgrounds. Because the thing is that the questionnaire, that is the questions that are being asked, are on the basis of your age and the stages. Questionnaire, it is a general developmental screen that assesses developmental challenges at specific ages. So we can say that in sum, this disease, it is definitely complex and multifaceted disorder that requires a multidisciplinary approach to treatment also. So early diagnosis and interventions, they are critical to improving the outcomes for children with ASD and their families. And by identifying and addressing autism early on, individuals, they can definitely receive the support they need and the therapies to lead fulfilling lives. So Nepal is on high alert as India says that Amritpal crossed the border. So Delhi informs Kathmandu that the absconding pro-Khalistan group leader could be trying to escape through the neighboring country, and Nepal police sends a team to border crossing areas. So he's in news and he has not been caught yet. So that would be a really big failure of our security agencies if he is successfully able to escape to Nepal and further to whichever country he wishes to. So the Chief of Army Staff General Manoj Pandey says that transgressions remains the potential trigger for escalations along the LAC with China, and he asserted that India has adequate reserves and was prepared to deal with any contingency. The Supreme Court says that borrowers, they should be heard before their accounts they are classified as fraud. So you need to hear them before you are going ahead with a final decision. So finance bill has been finally approved by both the houses. So it is important for us to know the constitutional article which talks about it, whether it's a money bill or not, then what are the powers regarding money bills to the Speaker of the House, and apart from that, like all the important details regarding it, and then the question of what are the different steps we need to know the proper process in chronological manner when we talk about the passage of budget in the House. So all these topics that becomes important, and there were some of the changes that were made in the tax rates as far as few direct taxes are concerned, like the securities transaction tax. So that was increased, and that would be negatively impacting the investors and the traders in the capital market. And finally, after a gap of nearly 20 years, we're seeing that NCRTs, they're going to be updated under the new education policy of 2020. So it would include attention to the playway method of teaching, as well as develop the problem solving abilities and improve the social and the emotional capacities of children. So these textbooks, they would be introduced in the academic year 2024-25. And they are in the keeping with the new the National Education Policy 2020 and the National Curriculum Framework, which was released in August 2022. So what is the Panchadi way? So basically the textbooks, they would be updated while keeping in mind the Indian roots, and has proposed a 5-step learning process which is named Panchadi for children at the preschool or the foundational level. So it comprises Aditi, that is introduction of a topic, both is conceptual understanding, then we have Abhyas, that is practicing, Prayog is application, and Prasar is expansion. So these are 5 Panchadis. So COVID numbers, they are still rising, and that is a concern. So please wear your masks and maintain social distancing whenever you are out of your houses. And coming to the world page. So Myanmar Junta says crackdown to continue and makes promises for the polls, but when, that is not clear. So we've been seeing that there have been going violent protests in Israel over the judicial reforms. So under pressure from the protesters, Netanyahu is going to delay the judicial overhaul. And following the Prime Minister's decision, the head of Israel's largest trade union said it would call off a general strike that threatened to grind the economy to a halt. And Netanyahu says he will consult his political opponents regarding the reforms. So Sri Lanka finally clears the global oil company's entry into country's retail fuel market, and it decided to award licenses to 3 global oil companies to operate in the domestic retail market as part of the government's efforts to restructure the state-owned enterprises. And we've also seen that finally they've been given the bailout by IMF also, because of the current economic situation and even the political turmoil, the instability that the country is facing. And then again, there have been violent protests going on in France over increasing the retirement age to 64. So still people, they are on the streets violating, basically protesting violently. So SEBI is going to regulate the index providers. So government puts the onus of regulating index providers on SEBI amid the concerns about the safety of investors' savings, which are parked in funds which are linked to indices that have varied or retained several Adani Group stocks despite their recent meltdown. So after this incidence of the crackdown on the SEBI group of the Adani group of companies after the release of the report by the Hindenburg Research Group, so we are seeing that SEBI is now in action and it is in a way trying to tightly regulate the capital market. Coming to the mint section. So firstly, we'll see what are the features of investing in target maturity funds. So they are basically open-ended debt funds which invest in debt securities of an underlying index with a specified maturity period in future. So they have specified maturity and they invest in debt securities of underlying index. And the index, it is usually comprised of, or it has a mix of securities of the public sector undertaking companies, or the state development loans, government securities are there, and other bonds are a component of it. So these basically your investments, your money, finally, it goes into diversified assets. So that is majorly to reduce the risk factor. So they're working both for short term and long term. So if you have any financial goal, so in line with the period, the target of maturity fund, you can invest in these type of funds and benefit from the higher safety they offer you, potential stability of the underlying portfolio, and lower cost these funds offer. So why you need to choose the target maturity funds? So the name is very self-explanatory that there is a target maturity period when you're investing in such type of funds. So they offer you high amount of liquidity, there is low duration risk, there is higher safety. So benefits of the target maturity funds, diversification, as we saw in the beginning, that your money goes into diversified things and areas, offers you liquidity. They are cost effective, that is not so costly if you want to invest in such types of target maturity funds. They are simplified, they offer you transparency, and you also get the indexation benefits. So everything is covered in one place. So these are all the benefits regarding them. Then coming to how the falling farm incomes impact India's economy is the next question. So after a period of robust crop prices, farm incomes are likely to take a hit in 2023 following a glut in perishable prices and damage wreaked by the unseasonal rains. And coupled with the stagnant rural wages, this could delay the recovery in the consumption also in the rural areas or in the areas where people are engaged in the agricultural activities. So basically, before understanding the impact, it is important to understand what is actually happening or how the income of farmers it is moving. So in 2022, following the Ukraine war, we saw that the prices of most agricultural commodities had shot up, and most of them was the fertilizers and also the cereal prices, specifically wheat, grains. So now, except for the cereals, farm gate prices, they have softened. But right now, the cereals prices for the wheat prices, they are still not cooling down. And most varieties of pulses and oilseeds, they are now selling at lower than the minimum support price. And in January and Feb, also the prices of the perishables like tomatoes, onion, and potatoes, they have crashed owing to a supply glut during the harvest. So we're seeing that the we also, address these things at top. So tomato, onion, and potatoes. So we saw that on the one side, wheat prices, they were rising up so sharply, and on the other hand, top prices, they were crashing. So farmers, they were forced to sell at less than the cost because the prices that they were getting were less than the MSP. And in March, also ready to harvest the winter crops like wheat, chickpeas, and mustard, they were damaged by hailstorms and unseasonal rains. That means lower income for the growers because their crop has been damaged. So obviously their income would be definitely impacted because of such type of unseasonal rain events. And ultimately, it would also be adding up to the inflationary pressure as far as the food inflation is concerned. So, talking about the projections for the period ahead, so we are expecting an El Nino this year. So, we've been seeing unseasonal rain. So, that is going to negatively impact the coming availability of the food grains. So, the farm incomes, they are projected to remain stagnant in the upcoming financial year. And the zero growth in the farm incomes in financial year 2024. So the lowest since 2016-17 compared with 6% growth in the farm incomes in 2022-23. So flat wages, high inflation, it will likely crimp the rural household spending also. So definitely if your income falls, so that would be negatively impacting even your consumption spending and your consumption demand. So how does rural incomes really impact the economy? So we see that two-thirds of India it lives in rural areas, and agriculture contributes to about 43% to incomes of the farm households and wages, around 34%. It comes from the agricultural sector. So for the non-farm families, wages they make up 54% of the incomes, and due to a prolonged period of either falling or stagnant wages, we are seeing households have been forced to slash their non-food consumption. And the volume growth of the fast moving consumer goods was in the negative for the sixth straight quarter. So, sales of discretionary items from two wheelers to footwear, they've also been impacted. So, obviously, if your income would fall, your consumption demand would also be impacted because of that. So, what steps can the government take? So, to support the growth in rural wages, the center it can allocate more funds for the rural job scheme. So, center can ensure uh, some schemes. It can ensure such steps so that the rural wages they increase and more job opportunities are provided to the rural people. So instead it's been basically slashed. The rural wages they've been slashed, and for farmers are suffering losses due to the weather. State governments they need to expedite the crop loss surveys and ensure timely compensation and their claim settlements for the farmers who have been provided with the insurance. And for major winter crops like wheat, the center it can announce a bonus over and above the MSP. So finally, the center it can directly compensate the farmers also whenever they sell the pulses and oil seeds at lower than the MSP. So these are some of the steps which can be taken by the government. Coming to Financial Express, so Reliance and Tata, they back the solar PLI projects and incentives worth rupees 14,000 crores are on offer. So having a look at the green goals, we are focusing much upon renewable energy and energy transition. So 39,600 megawatt is the total capacity of the solar photovoltaic manufacturing projects, and 1 lakh jobs are likely to be created. 35% are going to be the direct employment. So as many as 11 companies, including Reliance, Renew, Indosol, For Solar, Tata Power Solar, and awarded they have backed the solar photovoltaic manufacturing projects of total 39,600 megawatt capacity under the second tranche of this production linked incentive scheme. So they'll be manufacturing and producing these photovoltaic cells. Now, talking about cutting the logistics cost, you need to know what are different kind of schemes and programs that are being run by the government in order to ensure that logistics cost comes down at par with other developed countries. So one of the most important one is the PM Gati Shakti program that we have. So the Union Home Minister is saying that we'll have to remove the 8% and 13% the gap. So right now, when we talk about the logistics cost in India, it stands at 13%, and most of the developing countries, it is around 8%. So we need to close down on this gap. And India, it has formulated a framework for the next 5 years regarding the same. And he says that I can assure you that we'll reach 7.5% logistics cost in the next 5 years itself. So the goals are definitely ambitious, but it is important to achieve them because it's very easier, as we say that it's easier said than done. The PF rate has been raised marginally to 8.15% for the financial year 2023. And when we have a look at the trend over the years, so since financial year 2016, it was at 8.8. Right now, it is at 8.15. But compared to the previous year, it has been increased only by a marginal amount. So this we are seeing that this is the first hike after financial year 2018-19, because post that we were seeing that it was just falling. So when we have a look at what are the different types of investments, where does EPFO actually invest the money? So it goes into 64% goes into government securities and related investments. Then we have 22% into debt instruments and related investments, 10% is in equities, and 2.5% is in short-term debt instruments and related investments. So IMD further predicts rains in the wheat growing state, so that can definitely hamper the standing crop. And government may relax the norms for the procurement by allowing the grain with more moisture content and luster loss when it comes to the procurement done by the Food Corporation of India. So normally FCI and the state agencies, they purchase wheat at MSP with a maximum moisture content of 12%. So some relaxations they have been made by the government because of these unseasonal rainfalls. And last year, the Food Ministry allowed purchase of wheat with luster loss containing up to 25% affected kernels in two Madhya Pradesh districts. So finally, the procurement exercise is going to begin, and some relaxations that have been announced by the government. So more nations, they are kind of showing more interest in rupee trade settlements. So in this context, we have talked about Vostrocons, which is related to the settlement of trade in Indian rupees. And with this, we'll be also moving towards internationalization of Indian rupee and reducing our dependence upon US dollars. So that would be reducing even our vulnerabilities and risks associated with the dependence upon US dollar. Taking up the Indian Express now. So for the first time in 4 years, the generic jobs in January to Feb, they are below pre-COVID levels. So new attendance and payment systems, migrants back at work are the likely reasons behind this. So we have talked in detail about the management of the garbage landfill sites, how they can be scientifically managed. We have talked about there needs to be a proper plan. It can be divided into different blocks, but the most important topic and the point that we discussed here was waste segregation at household level. And we talked about how that waste can be generated, it can be basically utilized in waste to energy plants for generation of electricity, and which kind of waste can be basically used in those waste to energy plants. So everything is political here. We'll just move to the editorials. So no reaction as the threshold of overreach by the establishment shifts higher and higher. So in a democracy, a smooth transition of power in a fair election, it requires several conditions. And the ruthless crushing of the opposition and the squelching of liberty erodes these conditions. And the first is that the professional politicians, they treat each other as members of the same profession, not as existential enemies to be vanquished by any means. And when once a regime does that to its opponents, it fears the consequence of losing the power. So it can no longer rest in the comfortable belief that democracy is a game of rotating power and transitions should be a routine. So basically, that is not believed. So we saw yesterday itself that center has been lifting the law in an incremental manner in the northeastern states, and it must continue with this exercise. So the most important fact that we got to know yesterday was that the AFSPA Act, it has been completely lifted from two northeastern states of Meghalaya, and Tripura. So it is basically implemented in those states, in those areas which are declared to be disturbed areas. And we know about the NSCN's their demand regarding a separate about the Greater Nagaland. So some of the separatist demand which are there, and because of which some areas are declared as disturbed areas. So it is important for us to know what are the powers that are vested with the security personnels who are deployed in those types of areas under the AFSPA Act. So in Supreme Court today, disqualification of another member of parliament. Supreme Court, it has listed for hearing Tuesday, on Tuesday, petition that was filed by Lakshadweep MP, who's challenging the Lok Sabha Secretariat's unlawful action in failing to withdraw its disqualification notice more than 2 months after the Kerala High Court stayed the MP's conviction and 10-year sentence in an attempt to murder case. So, because this topic is in news regarding the disqualification of the legislator, we saw that Supreme Court, if Supreme Court it holds on or it stays the decision regarding the conviction of an MP or an MLA, then the person would not be disqualified. So regarding that, there is an issue for from Lakshadweep, and basically it is saying, it has been argued that the conviction was, since it was stayed by the Supreme Court, but the disqualification it has not been taken back. So it was there in the Lok Prahari versus Election Commission of India 2018 case when the Supreme Court gave this judgment. So this article has been exactly the same. It has been coming for the third time in front of me. So it is about the Cyrus crane. So last February, we saw the 35-year-old Mohammad Arif brought home an injured Cyrus crane he found in his village in UP, and the bird recovered in time but never left him. So recently, the duo, they became famous on social media, and officials, they came knocking. So last week, Arif, he was booked under the wildlife laws, and the bird was packed off first to a neighborhood sanctuary and then to the Kanpur Zoo. So this person, he was booked under a law. And what is the actual problem? So across the globe, rescuing the wildlife at will, that is not permitted. And this is because many such animals, they are not in need for rescuing. For example, wild cats, they leave their cubs to go hunting only to find them missing on return. So also many rescuers, they may not be equipped to either help the animals or ensure that they do not become a threat to the public health also. So because of these reasons, the law does not permit you to rescue any kind of animal. And obviously it might be because of some human reasons, because of humanity, that he helped this bird, and later on it did not left him. But more recently in 2021, a woman, she was charged of rescuing the wildlife without a permit in Michigan, US also. So even globally, the countries that do not allow the rescue of wildlife. So coming to India, what are the laws that gets violated because of such acts? So under Section 39 of the Wildlife Protection Act, no person is allowed to acquire or keep in possession or custody or control any wildlife which is state property. So wildlife is a state property and you can't keep it at your home personally. So if anyone does so, for example, to treat an injured bird, as in the present case, she must report it to the nearest police station or the authorized officer within 48 hours of obtaining such possession. And further, we have Section 57 of the Acts, which says that if a person is found in possession, custody, or control of any wildlife, the burden of proof for the establishing that the possession is not illegal is on that very particular person only. So basically, you can't keep wildlife personally at your homes. That is not allowed. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining in Sarkari. And there's also a PDF link in the description box. So you can go through that for your revision exercise. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe button. And also, please like this video if you're finding it to be helpful and if you're following us every day.